Hello and welcome to the Leader to Leader podcast, a CHIME Foundation series where we explore the forces shaping healthcare's future, from breakthrough innovation to the realities of leading through complexity. I'm Russ Branzell, your host and the president and CEO of CHIME. Here with me today is Dr. Shiv Rao, founder and CEO of Abridge and a practicing cardiologist at the University of Pittsburgh Medical Center. Dr. Rao brings a rare and deeply valuable perspective to digital health leadership. In addition to leading Abridge, he continues to care for patients, giving him firsthand insight into the realities of clinical workflows, cognitive burden, and the very human side of care delivery. Shiv, it is always a pleasure to spend time with you, but especially today on the program. Welcome back.
Thank you so much, Russ. It's such a privilege to be here.
Well, let's just jump right into this. And so many healthcare leaders can attest to being close to work and have that feeling that they really are representing modern day clinical workflows and on the forefront of leading things. But you are truly living in both camps. You are on the forefront of inventing some of the greatest technology we'll ever use in healthcare. At the exact same time, a practicing cardiologist using that very same technology. Tell us a little bit of how you, one, kind of balance those two worlds, but also your focus as a cardiologist. How do you think that helps you in the lenses of how you look at technology, especially now with deploying such an advanced AI-driven technology?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I think both of those worlds are they feed off each other. I think my world inside of a bridge inspires in some ways the way I approach care delivery these days. I still see patients about a weekend a month, so it's not a lot. But when I'm running in the hospital, my focus obviously is foremost on patient care, but I'm also thinking about all the pain points, all the problems, all the opportunities for us to go after, to be able to solve over time. And on the other side of the coin, when I'm seeing patients, I'm getting so much inspiration. I'm staying close to the mission. I'm staying grounded in what we're really all about at a bridge. For me, I think even like the origin stories for the company, certainly as a cardiologist, I nothing crushes my soul more than clerical work. None of us doctors and nurses went to school to be accountants, to be revenue cycle experts. We just want to deliver the best possible care and spend the most amount of time with our patients and deliver the best possible experience and outcome. And sometimes you feel like you're being pulled in different directions, and it can lead to a lot of angst and even burnout. And I think being able to be a part of solving that problem, being able to have a lot of empathy for that problem is important to me. But honestly, it's important to, all the clinicians in the company. We take a lot of pride that there are clinicians who are working across not just product development and engineering, but there are also clinicians on the partner success team. They're on the ground every single week in health systems, listening to doctors and gaining empathy and bringing that back to our teams so that we can build, measure, learn that much faster.
Yeah, I would imagine this world of duality that blends together so well for you, especially in what you're trying to do, gives you a real perspective of how things are really kind of advancing so quickly in the industry. Not only do you see day-to-day change, but you also, as you said, monthly go in and see monumental changes that might be affecting healthcare delivery and the roles and lives of clinicians. I think that's amazing. So how is at this point, and it's interesting, people think AI is brand new. Maybe people always put a comparison of, well, I remember when ChatGPT came out just a few years ago, and that's when AI started. And AI has been around for decades and decades and decades. But now the application of it is so significant. How would you describe kind of where you're at in your journey at a bridge as the founder, as the creator of so much of this? And how are you leading through what most would describe in our industry as rapid acceleration and adoption? So, kind of tell us about that process.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, it's been an absolutely wild last 4 or 5 years. I think that since 2017, there have been three variants of AI company. There have been companies that started post-transformer and pre-LLM, pre-large language model, companies that were post-large language model, but pre-agent, and now companies that are post-agent. And things are moving so rapidly that a part of the game, a part of the challenge is to become the latest variant as fast as you possibly can, because it might mean you organize your company differently. It might end up meaning that you have to re-architect your solution with the latest sort of techniques and tools. And so it's one of those moments where you have to hold loosely, sometimes to technology, but hold very tightly to what your mission is, what your North Star is, because otherwise you can get very easily distracted by something that might happen because the headlines, the discoveries are almost happening, every week, if not sometimes it feels like every day. So when the ground is shifting that quickly, I think having some strong ideas that you hold really, really tightly to that North Star, that mission, I think is so critical. And back to your, our first sort of question and conversation, I think that's why for me it's so important and critical to still stay close to, ground truth, stay close to clinical care and continue to see patients and stay grounded in like the day to day and what we really need to be building for. So it's exciting, and at the same time, I think it creates some clarity. There was like a blog post that was very influential a couple of years ago by a researcher at Anthropic that suggested that the two most important attributes anymore in this new moment, this AI moment, this paradigm shift, are agency and taste. And agency, I think we can all kind of into it. It's that ability to just get things done, to find a way, to think outside the box, and and not take necessarily like the constraints as anything but an excuse to be more creative. And taste, however, I think is really a proxy for judgment. And it's the combination of those two attributes that I look for in everyone in our company, but I also try to remind myself are the most important to sort of keep up with this moment right now.
Yeah, you mentioned kind of this world of the clinician and what they're having to deal with, and so much burden, clerical work. It just seems to overwhelm a very already stressed industry. And even before I took this position in 2013, I was the CEO of a medical group in Colorado. And when
Mhm.
I would round on the physicians, the nurses, the techs, none of them ever complained about, seeing patients. No one ever
Mhm.
complained about, for the most part, about the air conditioning or the building or anything of
Yeah.
that nature. They just almost always had this sense of, I'm overwhelmed with too much work.
Yeah.
And never once did they say, and I feel bad because I don't have enough patience. They always had enough patience. It was always, there's
Yeah.
all this other stuff stealing my joy. So as you've worked so hard to take one of the most important parts away or improve the process of moving from traditional dictation and documentation and note taking, all this other kind of stuff, to more of this ambient generative AI, get this stuff naturally happening. Where do you see this shifting, and what are some of the great wins you're seeing as well?
Yeah, absolutely. I think that the technologies have shifted, and how we end up solving problems will continue to shift. But for us at Abridge, the core thesis is that healthcare is human, and thus one of the original signals, one of the most upstream signals in healthcare delivery is a conversation. It's a dialogue. It's upstream of so many different workflows, and being a part of that conversation means that we can not only help with clerical work like documentation, like order entry, like ICD diagnosis, insertion into the medical record, like prior authorization, like clinical trial recruitment, like the list goes on and on and on. But we can also, by being in the conversation, we can bend the trajectory for what happens next. We can bend the trajectory for outcomes, whether they're clinical or financial. So wedging into that conversation meant that we can extend into what happens even before it and then what happens after. And it's a very natural extension. So for example, now when I use a bridge, before I even walk in the room, I can get a summary, a quick gist almost like a pre-chart of who this patient is. I used to have a Monday clinic, cardiology clinic, and every Sunday night I would sit in front of Sunday night football and just pre-chart. And now having AI, having an agent get started on that, over the weekend before Monday clinic, but to have it ready for me even before I walk in the room, to be cued on what questions I should potentially ask, things I should keep in mind based on phone calls to the clinic recently from that patient, to be able to walk in that room feeling like a superhero, like I have all the context, I can hit the ground running and build rapport that much more quickly as well, help the patient feel like they're known. And then afterwards, to be able to, have all these artifacts, to be able to swivel my chair and see not just my note there, but everything else that's really important. It's unburdening, and we get to continue to sort of extend from there. So for us, the thesis has always been that wedge of the conversation and then extending from there. And it's been interesting to see the different sort of market or industry labels evolve over time. Initially, it was AI scribe, and I think that makes sense because the initial product that really took off was documentation. And then it sort of became a category of ambient. Well, I think that sort of reflected a recognition that there was a lot more that you could do in the background with this signal. But now I think there's a recognition that it's just sort of care delivery AI. It's just sort of this AI layer in healthcare, because these notes are informed by so many inputs. It's not just what happens in the conversation, but they should be informed by what's in the medical record. They should also be informed by information that might live in payer systems, like prior authorization guidelines. They should also be informed by guidelines from, bodies that regulate what compliant documentation looks like for revenue cycle, for risk adjustment. They should include MDM criteria, and they should include meet criteria for every single problem. But then there's this other opportunity to actually cue the clinician, to not sort of have any flashing lights or beeping sounds, but to help them understand, when they want, what questions they should ask. Maybe they should consider a broader differential. Getting into that space of clinical decision support is something that we're spending a lot of time on right now. And so it just sort of, I think, like all of these categories start to sort of merge together, if that makes sense. So back to like what is so important for us at a moment that is just so unprecedented and so historic. Honestly, it's mission more than anything else. There are new techniques, new tools. Even in the last year, we talk a lot about context engineering in our engineering meetings. We talk a lot about harness engineering. Like, how do you create a harness that can help these agents actually leverage the right information at the right time with the right guardrails in place to deliver something reliably and at scale. And as much of as that ground is going to continue to shift, for us, what won't shift is that ultimately our aspiration is to, one, save time, two, save money for the system at large, and three, save lives. And I say that with humility as a cardiologist, but now more than ever, it feels like everything is possible.
Yeah, it's interesting. One of my mentors back in Colorado, a good friend of mine, Dr. Todd Whitsitt, who also was a cardiologist, he told
Hmm.
me everything can be answered in the clinical world in time, money, or patient care. And every physician generally looks at it through one of those three lenses. And if you can
Mhm.
save time, create time, or you can create better, money flow, some kind of reduced expense, improved revenue, those are great. If you
Yeah,
can improve patient care and do all three, they'll build a statue of you outside,
a hundred
because
percent.
rarely is that. But the thing he told me at the very end was really good clinicians actually will sometimes give up time and give up money because they care so much about patients. And
So
I
true.
think we've reached an inflection point. You just described that there's trust in the AI that maybe, just maybe, we can do all three, which is a rarity in this world in patient care, that we can do all three for our caregivers, our clinicians that are out there. So as we integrate this, there is the question that comes up sometime of, can we really trust this technology? Now, ironically, it's a question we ask all the time. People say, "Can you trust the internet?" 30 years ago, can
Yeah.
we trust cloud computing? And who knows where this magic cloud is? And now we're having the exact same conversations with ambient and AI. So I'd love to hear your perspective as we these things become kind of transparent. It's just, as you called it, care delivery AI. It's just part of the process. How do we make sure we maintain that trust that, especially some people that are older say, I don't want that technology doing all that for me, when the reality is just what's going to happen.
Yeah, absolutely. Trust is so important. I mean, that we say in our industry that healthcare moves at the speed of trust. It's
Mm.
it's table stakes. Privacy is paramount. But in a world where the technology is moving as quickly as it is, I think again it's so important to have some principles. At least it's so useful. We've found to have principles that we can kind of anchor our work against to um, remain confident that we're continuing to build trust. We're not losing the plot. So we've over the years and we've since really founding we've tried to unpack trust into transparency, reliability, and credibility. And underneath each one of those, so sort of like words, is a bucket of opportunity for us to build. So, for example, with transparency, we can publish papers, we can be transparent about our benchmarks, we could be transparent to the end user. We've had a feature called linked evidence that is now extended into all of our other features from prior authorization to clinical decision support, where we give you the evidence, we give you the citations, and we show you where some generated output came from. Reliability, that's not just uptime, it's not just the SLAs, it's not just infrastructure and the ability to scale, but the ability to reliably produce outputs that can meet the mark. In this moment, reliability, especially for AI native systems, is so critical. And I think it's not talked about enough. It's so easy these days, and it's so exciting that all of us, and all, every one of us should be doing this, but can play with AI and build a prototype really, really quickly, can translate our ideas almost, at the blink of an eye with a single prompt. We can start to build ourselves. And those prototypes are very different in my personal experience for sure than something that could become a scalable product. There's still like a distance there that needs to be traversed. And so reliable systems end up having all of that engineering we talked about before behind the scenes having to work things out. They have to have harness engineering in place. They have to have the right context engineering, the right protocols, the right security, the right privacy. They have to be, the all of the context needs to be orchestrated in such a way that the output that you're getting is going to meet the mark, at real scale. And with these probabilistic systems, it's a lot easier said than done. And so it always feels like you're there, and that's certainly a mirage that I frequently fall prey to. Is like, hey, I just built something, but the difference between building something and then being able to go deliver something to a bunch of people
Mhm.
is very different. But then finally, credibility, and I think the credibility piece is partly maybe answered by being able to solve problems at scale for complicated situations and care settings. So some of our partners, whether it's a federally qualified health center on one end of the spectrum, all the way to a large system like Kaiser, for example, there's just so much complexity, and being able to demonstrate that you can account for that complexity, I think, creates credibility. Publishing papers creates credibility. Being arm's length distance from researchers who are studying our technology creates credibility. But the combination of all of that, I think, is what amounts to trust. But one thing that we are eyes wide open on is as long as it takes to build trust, because that doesn't happen overnight. You can lose it so quickly. You can lose it in the blink of an eye as well. And so it's so important to just not lose sight of how we're continuing to evolve our different approaches to building across those three sort of aspects of trust.
As you talk about that, it's interesting because Chime does a lot of work in Washington. I'm sure you get pulled into a lot of those conversations as well. And you think about some of the big things that Washington's kind of regulated and try to set standards. I mean, HIPAA took 5 years to develop and put into law. High
Yeah.
trust was actually across three different administrations being developed.
Hmm.
And occasionally when we're in Washington, we get asked questions by either staffers or actually some of our legislators of, well, what kind of structure and law stuff and standards should we put around this? I said, by the time you think about what you want to do, that train will have moved so fast down the
Yeah.
line that what you've tried to regulate won't happen. And that wasn't true with things in the past in technology. We had
Yeah.
years,
Yeah.
sometimes decades. So as you think about this, what's our responsibility as an industry? What's Chime's responsibility? What's your responsibility to setting standards and guidelines in something that is literally what you look at today will become, may even be significantly different or completely different tomorrow? How do you put some structure around that?
Yeah, it's a really tough challenge. I think that at some level of abstraction, we have to have some standards in this regulated industry where privacy is paramount, where this is really sacrosanct data that we're dealing with. And at the same time, for any given challenge, any given use case, we have to think from first principles about how we should be evaluating. So there are low stakes workflows out there where evaluations maybe don't even, become a thing that we need to talk about. But the closer and closer you get to the point of care, the higher the stakes end up becoming. And that's where I think, to some extent, abstracting the first principles from how we used to think about regulating technology, but applying them somehow to this moment is probably going to be really, really important. So if I'm in an ICU and I'm seeing a patient with cardiogenic shock and I want to use a new technology, I'm going to expect a certain level of, I'm going to expect a certain level of rigor and certification and compliance. And at the same time, if I'm using a technology in my outpatient clinic that is, helping me line up some specialist referrals that I've already placed and helping me triage all of my clerical work that I have to do before I drive home. Like, that's a very different space and very different opportunity. And I think the danger that we have right now is to sort of conflate all of those different use cases into the same bucket and apply them to the same sort of rigorous standards, when we really should be thinking about them, from the standpoint of risk. So I don't know if that fully answers your question, but I think at a moment where the technology is evolving so rapidly and is capable of so much more every single day, we have to be sort of careful in healthcare to think back to what problem we're actually trying to solve, and what are the stakes, and what kind of barriers we need to create, what kind of good friction we need to put into the system in order to ensure good outcomes.
Yeah, and what you said earlier, we kind of have to bring that back to it. Healthcare is human. And I know one of the things that we've said from stage many times is if you work in healthcare, you're part of patient care, whether
Yeah.
you think you are or
Mhm.
not. If you're in food
Yeah.
services or you provide software. And
Yeah.
I remember not that many years ago getting pretty mad at a CEO of a tech company who said, we're not in healthcare, we just produce tech. I said,
Mhm.
well, then you need to get out of healthcare. Because if
Yeah.
you don't believe your patient care, everything you do, then you shouldn't work in healthcare. And I think as you look at this, and I've been to your events, it is unbelievably humanistic because in the end, I know that's what you believe, but I also believe it's a core tenet of what your company is, which is it's part of the human process. And even down to how you describe relationships with some of your customers and outcomes and adoptions. You call them love stories. It reminds me of a good friend of mine, Ivo Nelson, who wrote a book, Love-Based Culture, which is
Mm.
really all about everybody wants to come to work and feel loved, feel cared about, feel safe. And I know you've tried to create this as part of your culture. I guess the fundamental question is, you're a software company. Why would you want to take that approach?
I think that as a clinician, like, you think about, but really, to your point, which is so profound, I think, like, all of us in this industry, on some level, we want to serve, we want to help, we want to do good. And that instinct, I think, gives us so much energy. It gives us so much resilience. It gives us the ability to to operate effectively and to run marathons. And it sort of gives us access to the most important thing, I think, in my estimation, especially at such a wild moment, especially in technology. It gives us access to purpose, and it helps ground the work. And for us, I think getting access to purpose every single day, knowing like, hey, we are grinding, we are working these hours every single week, but we're doing it for this reason that is core to why we joined this company and this mission and why we're working in this industry. It's not dopamine; it's a way better neurochemical. It's oxytocin. It allows you to feel fulfillment. And I feel so privileged and lucky to be in a space, to be in an industry, to be in a company where we have seemingly an endless supply of that, of that chemical, to go around. Every single day, we have what you're referring to, we have a channel inside of our company communication system inside of Slack where that's called Love Stories, where we programmatically, but people can also manually insert these love stories that we hear from our partners, and it could be from a clinician, a doctor, or a nurse. It could be from an administrator or an executive. I was just at a conference yesterday in Phoenix, and I met with a CMIO of a children's hospital health system, and he shared some of the most positive, glowing feedback in relation to the quality of people, inside of our company who are working with him. And I immediately wanted to put that in that channel because people need to know that the work matters, and this we're a part of something much bigger, and it's just so differentiating as well that in a world where technology often kind of seeks the lowest hanging sort of like adrenaline or dollar, that we get to be in an industry where we can aspire to do more.
So, kind of wrapping our time up with maybe a big picture question and some advice maybe you can give, Shiv, to so many of our digital health leaders that are trying to get their head around this still. As you said, it's moving super fast, but at the exact same time, just when you start thinking maybe you understand a little bit, then the next day happens in some major change or even as you described your own company, kind of moving through those three transitional points to care delivery AI, it's moving really fast. For some of us, I mean, our first real exposure, now granted, it's been around for decades and decades, was just 41 months ago. Think about that from that perspective. That was when ChatGPT was released.
Right.
And you ask somebody how long it's been around, they probably think it's been around for decades. And the reality is, think about just that little thing and
Yeah.
how much it's fundamentally changed the world. And so, as we think through this now, what advice would you give our digital health leaders out in the industry as they're deploying AI and they're thinking about how fast can I scale, but yet and the speed in which I can scale, but at the exact same time, do I do it and lose the human experience? How would you give advice for them as leaders to approach this as we wrap our time up?
Yeah. Well, I think culture is everything right now, and leaders can demonstrate, they can, show and also tell, but being able to get AI pilled themselves, being able to use this technology and get a feel for this technology and start to build intuition about where to apply this technology is so important. There's one approach where you can kind of sprinkle this technology on top of all of your processes and hope to gain efficiencies. And you probably will. And there's also another approach where for certain workflows, certain processes in healthcare, we should actually be thinking about redesigning the system end to end because this technology allows us to actually think from first principles, and
Mm,
it can allow us to short circuit really, really huge problem areas. So, for example, thinking about revenue cycle, when I see a patient, the last thing I want to do is think about revenue cycle. I just want to focus on the person in front of me. And so, why can't we build technology that actually allows the clinician to fully focus on the person in front of them? Today, what I would do, or yesterday before using Abridge, what I would do is see the patient, write a note, put in ICD codes, they inform a claim in 837 that gets edited, and then it goes to the clearinghouse. There are more edits. It goes one to many different payers, some combination of mostly offshore labor, some process, a little bit of technology. there could be approvals and denials. If there's a denial, it's an 835. It comes all the way back to the provider side, and someone's adjudicating that denial again on the provider side and deciding to send me a message to create an addendum or bring that patient back because otherwise we're not going to get paid. And so a focus for us when we say save time and also more importantly when we say save money, what we really mean is helping the clinician focus on the person in front of them, because the AI and this new world of agents can actually take care of so many of these processes. But the ultimate sort of prize is only going to come if we think about redesigning the entire end to end. And sometimes it might mean that we have to crawl, walk, run. And at first, we'll sprinkle some AI on top of all of these processes. But in parallel, especially for these really impactful sort of parts of the industry that really represent literally hundreds of billions of dollars, we should think about redesigning them. And that's what we're trying to do at Abridge. So I think that every single health system leader should sort of can benefit, I think, I would say with humility, in my experience, can benefit from thinking about it from the standpoint of where can AI create, immediate kind of quick hit wins, but where is the ultimate leverage? It's probably going to be redesigning things, from scratch. And then the other thing I would say is agility and recognizing that your impression about a certain technology a couple weeks ago, you need to update that prior all the time, at as frequently as you possibly can. Perhaps, every month. If you can do it, every couple weeks, because that's how fast the technology is moving. And it can be frustrating because in our industry, sometimes you want to assume that something that's been deployed is going to be relatively stable, whatever those benchmarks were in terms of that technology, that solution's ability to solve the problem. You want to assume that, okay, those benchmarks are probably going to stay relatively stable for a period of time. Maybe like we used to think, a year, maybe we used to think a quarter, but now really, ideally, these technologies should be evolving in a responsible way, in a safe way, continually. And that's a very, very different mindset. And that means that if you didn't believe in something working, a couple months ago, and you got to make sure that opinion doesn't get calcified. And from a change management perspective, it means helping everyone inside of your health system also adopt that same sort of point of view to constantly be re-examining their priors and their impressions, because we should all have an abundant mindset about what's possible right now.
Well, Shiv, thank you so much for sharing that. And your perspective as both clinician and CEO, founder of a company, gives us a great reminder of why healthcare is healthcare. And I love what you said at the very beginning. Healthcare is human. We take care of people at their most vulnerable times. Also, a good reminder is if you're in healthcare, we're all in patient care. So I think there's just some amazing thoughts today. Most importantly, thank you for what you're doing. Thank you for what you're doing on your clinical side and continue to take care of people in some of their toughest times. But at the exact same time, thank you for what you're doing to make the experience better for our clinicians, for our caregivers, and administrators in so many places. We truly appreciate everything you do.
No, thank you for what you're doing, Russ. Take a lot of inspiration from your work as well.
And to our listeners, thank you for joining us today for this episode of Chime's Leader to Leader podcast. To hear more conversations with digital health leaders, please visit us at chimecentral.org/media or find us on Spotify, Apple, or wherever you get your podcasts. Until next time, stay bold, stay curious, keep pushing the boundaries of digital health to create smarter, safer, and more resilient care. For now, stay safe and God bless.